I stepped out of my car into the blast furnace of Nevada heat, squinting against the sun as I took in the Desert Moon Motel. The neon sign buzzed overhead, half the letters flickering weakly even in daylight. It was Tuesday, and the asphalt parking lot radiated heat that made the air shimmer. I grabbed my duffel bag from the passenger seat and stood for a moment, letting the reality sink in. Grandpa Keith was gone, and somehow I'd inherited his job. The weight of it hit me differently standing here. Keith's funeral had been last week, a small affair with distant relatives I barely knew, and a few locals who'd known him from the motel. Now I was here to take his place, a job I hadn't asked for but couldn't bring myself to refuse. Family obligation, I guess. I made my way to the office, the duffel bag growing heavier with each step. The air conditioning hit me like a wall when I pushed open the glass door, the little bell above it announcing my arrival. "You must be Travis." A woman looked up from behind the front desk. "I'm Autumn Kelly, day manager. Your grandfather spoke highly of you." "Thanks," I said, setting my bag down. "I appreciate that." Autumn was in her early 50s with black hair streaked with gray pulled back in a ponytail. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, practical clothes for a practical job. "Let me show you around before I head out," she said, coming around the desk. "Night shift starts at 8, which gives us plenty of time." The tour didn't take long. The Desert Moon was a single-story horseshoe-shaped building with 26 rooms. The office sat at the center with the manager's apartment directly behind it, my new home. A small pool that had seen better days occupied the courtyard. "Most of the job is pretty straightforward," Autumn explained as we walked. "Check-ins, answering the phone, basic maintenance if needed. We're not exactly the Ritz. Most folks stay one night and move on." She showed me the laundry room, maintenance closet, and ice machine before bringing me back to the front desk. "Your grandfather kept this place running smoothly for almost 40 years, she said. "He was reliable, always showed up on time, never called in sick. I hope you take after him." I nodded. "I'll do my best." Night shift is quiet most of the time. Occasionally you'll get late check-ins, truckers mostly, or people who miscalculated their drive times. The computer system is ancient but simple. I've left instructions next to the monitor. She checked her watch. "I need to get going. My truck's been making a funny noise, and I want to get to the mechanic before they close. Any questions?" "I think I'm good for now," I said, though I had a million questions spinning in my head. "Your grandfather's things are still in the apartment. I didn't touch anything except to clean a bit. Keys are in the top drawer." She grabbed her purse from under the counter. "Good luck, Travis. I'll see you tomorrow afternoon for the handoff." And just like that, I was alone. I stood behind the front desk, looking at the outdated computer, the key rack on the wall, the stack of tourist brochures for attractions that were at least 50 miles away in any direction. This was my life now. The top drawer contained several sets of keys labeled with neat handwriting: office, apartment, storage, pool gate. Beneath them lay a worn leather notebook. I picked it up, figuring it contained operational guidelines or guest information. I flipped it open and immediately recognized my grandfather's handwriting, small, precise letters that filled the pages. But instead of check-in procedures or maintenance schedules, I found something entirely different. Rule number 1. If you see the man by the front desk at 0404, do not speak to him. Do not acknowledge him in any way. He will leave after exactly 7 minutes. I frowned and turned the page. Rule number 2. Room 24 must remain vacant at all times. If the reservation system assigns a guest to room 24, move them to another room. If someone calls from room 24, note it in this log but do not investigate. The next page continued. Rule number 3. If a child asks to use the pool between midnight and 5 a.m., politely refuse. Do not explain why. Do not follow the child if they leave. And then, rule number 4. During power outages, immediately drop to the floor behind the desk. Stay there until power returns. Do not look over the counter. The rules went on, each more bizarre than the last. I closed the notebook and shook my head. Keith had been getting up there in years. The family had noticed him becoming more eccentric, more set in his ways. Mom had mentioned his quirky habits a few times during our rare phone calls, but I'd never imagined anything like this. I set the notebook aside. Clearly, my grandfather had developed some strange rituals to cope with the monotony of night shifts in the middle of nowhere. Maybe the isolation had gotten to him toward the end. That night, I settled into the routine. I checked in a middle-aged couple driving from California to Colorado. I answered the phone twice, both wrong numbers. I watched TV on the small set behind the counter and made myself a microwave dinner in the apartment. The first night passed without incident. So did the second. By the third night, I'd established a pattern: read, watch TV, do a walkthrough of the property every couple of hours, and occasionally deal with a late arrival. The week continued uneventfully. I got used to the sounds of the old building, the hum of the vending machines, the occasional ping of the ice maker, the distant drone of traffic on the highway. I'd glance at Keith's notebook sometimes, wondering what had been going through his mind when he wrote those rules. But as the days passed and nothing unusual happened, I stopped thinking about them. By Sunday night, I was completely comfortable with the job. It was easy money, really. Sitting at a desk all night in an air-conditioned office, occasionally helping a tired traveler find a place to sleep. The strange rules in my grandfather's notebook seemed like nothing more than the odd superstitions of an old man who'd spent too many nights alone. I almost forgot about them entirely. Almost. I woke up to the sound of my alarm on night 8. The red numbers on my bedside clock read 3:30. I'd set it early so I could grab coffee and something to eat before heading to the front desk for the late shift. The night manager's apartment sat directly behind the office, which was convenient but made it hard to separate work from personal time. Not that there was much personal time to speak of in this place. After throwing on my uniform, a simple button-up shirt and jeans, I made my way to the small kitchenette. The apartment wasn't much, just a bedroom, bathroom, and this main room with basic cooking facilities, but it was included with the job, so I couldn't complain. I fixed myself a sandwich and poured coffee from the pot I'd made earlier, then headed through the connecting door to the office. The night was quiet, even by Desert Moon standards. We had 4 occupied rooms, all checked in before I came on shift. The ancient computer hummed on the desk, its fan making a rhythmic clicking sound that had become weirdly comforting over the past week. I settled into the worn office chair and flipped through a magazine someone had left behind. The clock on the wall ticked past 4. My eyes felt heavy, and I considered making another pot of coffee to stay alert. At exactly 4:04, the electronic chime above the front door sounded. I looked up, surprised to have a visitor at this hour. A tall man in a crisp white suit stood just inside the entrance. He hadn't opened the door, I would have heard it, but somehow he was there. His skin was unnaturally pale, almost translucent under the fluorescent lights, and his dark eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my mouth go dry. Keith's notebook flashed into my mind. Rule number 1, ignore the man by the front desk at 4:04 for exactly 7 minutes. The man didn't move. He barely seemed to breathe, just stood there, staring at me with those eyes that looked like deep holes in his pale face. I wanted to ask if he needed a room, or if he was lost, or anything to break the silence that hung between us. I gripped the edge of the desk, fighting the urge to speak. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure he could hear it. 6 feet separated us, but it felt like inches. The air in the room seemed to thicken, making it hard to breathe. The tall figure remained completely still, not even blinking. I tried to focus on the magazine in front of me, but the words blurred together. I couldn't help glancing up every few seconds to see if he was still there. He was, always in the exact same position. Minutes crawled by. My watch said it had been 5 minutes since he arrived. 2 more to go if I was following Keith's rule. I didn't know why I was following it. The whole thing seemed crazy, but something about the man's stillness kept me silent. 6 minutes. The stranger's head tilted slightly like he was studying me. A small, tight smile formed on his lips, revealing teeth that looked too perfect, too white. 7 minutes. Without a word, the man turned and walked toward the door. No sound came from his footsteps. The door didn't chime when he left. One moment he was there, and the next, he was gone. I released the breath I'd been holding and slumped in my chair. My hands were shaking. What the hell had just happened? Had I imagined it? Maybe I was more tired than I thought. But I knew I hadn't imagined him. The man had been as real as the desk in front of me. I spent the rest of my shift jumping at every sound. When morning came, I couldn't wait to hand things over to Autumn. Before she arrived, I pulled up the security footage from the night before. The camera above the front door should have captured the strange visitor. I scrolled through the time codes until I reached 4:04. The footage showed the empty lobby, then me looking up suddenly as if reacting to someone entering, but there was no one there. The video clearly showed me staring at empty space, my expression tense, my body rigid. 7 minutes later, I visibly relaxed, like whatever I'd been watching had disappeared. But the man in the white suit was nowhere on the recording. I closed the video player and sat back, trying to make sense of what I'd seen or hadn't seen. Maybe I needed more sleep. Maybe the isolation was getting to me after just a week, but deep down, I knew what had happened was real. I went back to the apartment and fell into an uneasy sleep, dreaming of pale skin and dark eyes watching me from the foot of my bed. The next night started normally enough. I checked in a couple, older folks driving from Utah to California, and helped a trucker with directions to the nearest all-night diner. By midnight, the motel had settled into its usual quiet rhythm. The phone rang at 2:17, startling me out of the paperback I was reading. "Desert Moon Motel," I answered. "Could you bring some towels to room 24, please?" The voice was soft, almost a whisper, with a strange echo like they were speaking from the bottom of a well. I frowned, checking the computer. "Room 24 should be vacant. Are you sure you have the right room number?" "Room 24, the voice repeated. "We need towels." I hesitated, remembering Keith's second rule. "Keep room 24 vacant, log calls from room 24, but don't investigate." But curiosity got the better of me. If someone was in that room, I needed to know. "I'll bring them right over," I said, hanging up. I grabbed fresh towels from the supply closet and walked across the courtyard toward room 24, which was at the far end of the building. The night was cool, with a slight breeze carrying the scent of sage from the surrounding desert. The only sounds were the distant hum of traffic on the highway and the buzz of the fluorescent lights around the pool. Room 24 looked like all the others from the outside. Beige door with peeling paint, brass numbers slightly tarnished, small window with the curtains drawn. I knocked twice. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. "Housekeeping. I brought your towels." Still nothing. After a minute of silence, I used my master key to open the door. The room was dark, so I reached for the light switch. The overhead light flickered on, revealing a perfectly made bed with tight hospital corners. The surfaces were dust-free. The bathroom door stood open, showing clean fixtures, and not a single personal item was visible anywhere. The room was completely empty, with no signs that anyone had been there in days. I walked in slowly, checking the closet and bathroom. Nothing. The shower was dry, the toilet paper folded into a neat point, like our housekeeping staff always did after cleaning. The room smelled faintly of cleaning products and nothing else. "Hello?" I called out, feeling foolish. No one was here. No one had been here. I placed the towels on the bed and backed out of the room, locking the door behind me. The whole situation felt wrong, like I'd stepped into something I didn't understand. When I returned to the front desk, I pulled out Keith's notebook and read rule number 2 again. Keep room 24. Vacant log calls, but don't investigate. I'd already broken the rule by going to the room, but I decided to follow the second part. I wrote in the log, 2:17 a.m., call from room 24, requesting towels, room vacant. The rest of the night passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the uneasiness that had settled over me. When I checked the phone system the next morning, it showed that the call had indeed come from room 24's extension. How was that possible in an empty room? The pattern continued the following night, and the night after that. Always the same soft voice asking for towels, always around 2 in the morning. I stopped bringing the towels after the second night, just logging the calls as Keith had instructed. The room remained vacant, and I made sure to check it regularly during the day, to confirm no one had somehow checked in without my knowledge. By the end of the week, I'd received 5 calls from room 24. I no longer thought I was imagining things. Keith's rules weren't the paranoid instructions of an isolated old man. They were warnings. The Desert Moon Motel had secrets, and I was just beginning to uncover them. I noticed a pale boy staring at me through the lobby window. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with a round face and large eyes that seemed to reflect the office fluorescence a bit too brightly. I looked up from my book, wondering what a kid was doing outside the Desert Moon at, I checked my watch, 1:30 in the morning. When I glanced back, he was gone. I set my paperback down and walked to the door, peering out into the parking lot. The night was quiet except for the distant hum of highway traffic and the buzz of the neon vacancy sign. No sign of the boy. I had almost convinced myself I'd imagined him when the door chimed. The boy walked in with measured steps, his movements oddly precise. He wore a button-up shirt with short sleeves and dark pants that looked like they belonged in a different decade. His shoes were polished leather, not the sneakers you'd expect on a kid his age. "Good evening, sir," he said, his voice unnaturally clear and formal. "I would like permission to use your swimming pool." The words from Keith's notebook flashed in my mind. Rule number 3. Refuse pool access to children between midnight 5 a.m. "Hey there," I said, trying to sound casual despite the chill running up my arms. "Where are your parents?" The boy smiled without showing his teeth. "They allowed me to come ask. I enjoy nighttime swimming very much." He placed his small hands on the counter, fingers spread wide. "The water feels different at night, cooler, more welcoming." His fingernails were perfectly clean, almost too perfect. I looked past him toward the parking lot, searching for headlights or any sign of adults. "I'm sorry, but the pool closes at 10, I said, keeping my voice firm but friendly. "It's motel policy, no swimming after hours." The boy's expression changed, just for a second. His face darkened, features tightening into something that didn't look childlike at all. Then it passed, replaced by a smile that stretched his pale cheeks. "Perhaps tomorrow night, then," he said, backing away from the desk. "I'll return to ask again. I'm very persistent when I want something." He turned and walked out the door. I rushed to the window, watching as he moved across the parking lot toward the road. The lot lights cast long shadows, and within moments, the boy seemed to melt into the darkness beyond the property line. No car headlights flashed, no adult appeared to collect him. He was simply gone. I checked the security cameras immediately. The footage showed me talking to empty space, just like with the man in the white suit. My skin prickled with goosebumps as I rewound and watched again. I could see my lips moving, my head tilted down as if addressing someone much shorter than me, but the boy wasn't there. That night, I pulled out Keith's notebook and read rule number 3 again, this time with new understanding. I added my own note beneath it. Boy appears around 1:30 a.m., doesn't show up on camera, disappeared into darkness. The next night passed without incident. I kept glancing toward the door, half expecting to see the pale boy's face pressed against the glass, but he didn't appear. By the time my shift ended, I had almost convinced myself the encounter had been a product of too much caffeine and too little sleep. The following night proved me wrong. At exactly 1:30, the door chimed, and the boy walked in wearing the same outdated clothes. "Good evening, sir," he said with that same formal tone. "I would like permission to use your swimming pool." "I'm sorry," I said, not needing to fake the regret in my voice. There was something deeply sad about him, despite how unsettling he was. "The pool is closed at night, motel policy." The boy tilted his head, his eyes never blinking. "But I can see the water from here. It looks so inviting. I promise I'll be quiet." "Rules are rules," I said, gripping the edge of the desk. "I can't make exceptions." This time, the darkness that crossed his face lingered longer. His eyes seemed to sink deeper into their sockets, and his skin took on a grayish tint. "You could change the rules," he whispered, his voice now sounding like it was coming from somewhere much deeper than his small chest. "No one would know." I shook my head. "I'm sorry, but the answer is no." The boy's face suddenly brightened again, the disturbing moment passing like a cloud moving from the sun. "I understand. Perhaps tomorrow night." He turned and left, once again vanishing beyond the reach of the parking lot lights without any visible means of transportation. The pattern continued night after night, always at 1:30, always the same request, always the same polite refusal from me. But each time, the boy's reaction to my denial grew more disturbing. His face would contort for longer periods, his voice would deepen further, and sometimes the temperature in the lobby would drop noticeably during our interactions. On the 5th night, he placed his hands on the counter and leaned forward. "The water is calling to me," he said, his eyes reflecting the fluorescent lights in a way that made them appear to be glowing from within. "Don't you hear it? The splashing? The laughter?" I didn't hear anything except the hum of the vending machines and the distant sound of a truck on the highway. "The pool is closed," I repeated, my voice steady despite the fear crawling up my spine. "It's been so long since I felt the water," he continued as if I hadn't spoken, "so very long since I could swim." The way he said swim made it sound like he meant something else entirely. "I'm sorry, but you need to leave now," I said. For a moment I thought he might refuse. His fingers curled against the counter, nails scraping against the laminate surface. Then he straightened up, smiled that too wide smile, and walked out. I watched him go, noticing how he never seemed to arrive or leave by normal means. No car dropped him off. No parent waited outside. He simply appeared at 1:30 and disappeared into the darkness afterward. I began checking the security cameras that covered the parking lot and surrounding areas, but they never showed the boy arriving or leaving, just empty pavement and desert beyond. During my 3rd week at the Desert Moon, around 10 in the evening, the front door opened and a woman walked in. She wore an expensive-looking business suit, carried a leather briefcase, and moved with the confident stride of someone used to getting what she wanted. "I need a room for the night," she said without preamble, placing her credit card on the counter. "Of course," I replied, reaching for the registration form. "Can I get your name, please?" The woman opened her mouth to answer, then paused. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. She started, then stopped. "I'm sorry, what did you ask?" "Your name," I repeated, pen poised over the form. "I need it for the registration." She blinked rapidly, her perfectly manicured hand tightening around the handle of her briefcase. "Yes, of course, my name is—" She trailed off again, looking increasingly distressed. A memory surfaced, another of Keith's rules I hadn't encountered yet, something about asking for names 3 times. "Could you tell me your name?" I asked for the 3rd time, watching her carefully. The woman's face contorted with frustration. "Why do you keep asking me that? It's—" Her voice caught, as if the word was physically stuck in her throat. She looked down at her own driver's license visible in her open wallet, but her expression showed no recognition. I set the pen down slowly. I'm sorry, but I can't rent a room without a name for the registration. Her eyes snapped up to meet mine, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The warm brown had been replaced by a flat, empty blackness that extended to where the whites should have been. "You know who I am," she said, her voice suddenly deeper and resonant in a way that didn't match her slender frame. "Give me a room." I stood my ground, though every instinct screamed at me to run. "I need a name for the registration. It's policy." The woman, or whatever was wearing her appearance, slammed her hand down on the counter. The impact should have made a normal slapping sound, but instead produced a dull thud, like something much heavier than a human hand. "Give me a room!" she shouted, her voice splitting into multiple tones speaking in unison. "I can't help you without a name," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the terror gripping me. She snatched her credit card from the counter, her movements jerky and unnatural. "You'll regret this," she hissed, the words seeming to come from somewhere behind her teeth rather than her throat. The woman turned and stormed out, her heels clicking against the tile with unnatural force. Through the window, I watched her stride across the parking lot and continue straight into the desert darkness beyond, never turning toward the road or a vehicle. Once she was gone, a crushing sense of dread washed over me. I sank into my chair, hands shaking, sweat beading on my forehead despite the air conditioning. The feeling was overwhelming, a certainty that I had just narrowly avoided something terrible. I pulled out Keith's notebook again, flipping through until I found it. Rule number 7. Always ask for a name 3 times. If they cannot answer, refuse service immediately. Do not argue. Do not accept payment. I added my own note beneath it. Businesswoman couldn't provide name. Eyes turned black. Spoke with multiple voices when angry. The dread lingered for hours afterward, like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I checked and double-checked the locks on all the doors, though some part of me understood that conventional locks probably wouldn't stop whatever had just tried to check into the Desert Moon Motel. I woke to the sound of thunder cracking like a whip across the sky. 6 weeks into my night shift job, and this was the first real storm to hit the Desert Moon Motel. Rain pounded against the windows with a fury I hadn't expected from the desert, each drop hammering the glass like it was trying to break in. I'd been dozing in the office chair with a paperback splayed across my chest. The digital clock on the ancient computer read 3:27 in the morning. The storm had picked up in the last hour, going from distant rumbles to a full-on assault. Lightning flashed, turning the parking lot bright as day for a split second before plunging it back into darkness. The few guests we had, a family in room 4 and a pair of truckers in room 7 and 8, were all checked in and settled for the night. I hoped they were sleeping through the racket. I got up and walked to the window, watching sheets of rain sweep across the empty parking lot. The neon vacancy sign flickered as another bolt of lightning split the sky. The electricity in the building dimmed for a moment, then steadied. "Great," I muttered, returning to the desk. The last thing I needed was to deal with a power outage. I picked up my book again but couldn't focus on the words. The storm had me on edge and I kept glancing at the clock. 3:31, 3:32. At precisely 3:33, the lights went out. 1 second I was sitting in the fluorescent glow of the office, and the next I was swallowed by complete darkness. The hum of the air conditioner died. The red standby lights on the phone system blinked out. Even the exit sign above the door went dark. My heart jumped into my throat as Keith's notebook flashed in my mind. Rule number 4, drop behind desk during power outages until power returns. I didn't hesitate. I slid from my chair and dropped to the floor, crawling behind the front desk on hands and knees. The carpet felt rough against my palms as I pressed my back against the wall, tucking my knees up to my chest. In the darkness, the rain seemed louder, more insistent. Lightning flashed, offering brief glimpses of the empty lobby through the gap beneath the desk. I pulled out my phone, thinking to use it as a flashlight, but something stopped me, an instinct that told me staying hidden and quiet was more important than seeing. That's when I heard it. Heavy, deliberate footsteps approaching the lobby from the direction of the courtyard. The electronic door chime didn't sound. It was dead without power, but I heard the door open, the hinges creaking in a way they never had before. The footsteps were all wrong. Each one landed with too much weight, like something massive was walking on two legs that weren't built for it. The rhythm was off too, not the steady pace of a human, but uneven, with strange pauses between steps. I held my breath as the footsteps entered the lobby. They moved slowly past the seating area, past the vending machines, heading directly toward the front desk, my hiding spot. The footsteps circled the desk once, twice, then stopped right in front of it. I pressed myself harder against the wall, trying to make myself as small as possible. My lungs burned from holding my breath, but I didn't dare make a sound. A new noise joined the storm, labored, unnatural breathing that sounded like air being forced through something that wasn't lungs. Wet, raspy, with a bubbling quality that made my skin crawl. It was close, just on the other side of the desk. Then came the scratching. Long, slow drags against the floor, like claws or talons scraping across the linoleum. Back and forth, methodical and patient. Whatever was out there, it knew I was hiding. It was waiting. Minutes stretched like hours. The scratching continued, sometimes stopping for a few seconds before starting again. The breathing never ceased, growing louder at times as if the thing was leaning over the desk, trying to peer behind it. Lightning flashed again, and through the gap beneath the desk I saw a shadow, something tall and hunched, with limbs that didn't bend right. The brief glimpse was enough to make me bite down on my fist to keep from making a sound. I checked my phone. The thing had been there for almost 20 minutes. My legs were cramping and sweat soaked through my shirt despite the cooling air without the AC running. The scratching suddenly stopped. The breathing became more intense, deeper. I sensed movement, like it was about to come around the desk. Then, with a hum and a flicker, the power returned. Lights blazed on, the air conditioner roared back to life, and the computer monitor rebooted with a beep. The sudden noise and light seemed to startle whatever was there. I heard a hiss, not like a cat, but like steam escaping a pressure valve, and then rapid, heavy footsteps retreating toward the door. I stayed frozen behind the desk, counting to 100 in my head before I even considered moving. When I finally gathered enough courage to peek over the edge of the desk, the lobby appeared empty. Shakily, I stood up, my legs protesting after being curled up for so long. The lobby looked normal. Chairs in place, brochures neatly arranged, everything as it should be, but the air felt wrong, like it had been disturbed by something that didn't belong in this world. That's when I saw them. Deep scratches carved into the linoleum floor in front of the desk, 4 parallel lines that cut through the faded pattern and into the concrete beneath. I knelt down and ran my fingers over them. They were fresh, the edges sharp and clean. Whatever had been in the lobby during the blackout had left its mark. I went to the security camera monitor and rewound the footage, but as with the man in the white suit and the pale boy, the cameras showed only an empty lobby during the power outage. According to the video, nothing had entered, nothing had made those scratches. I pulled out Keith's notebook from the desk drawer and read Rule Number 4 again. Drop behind desk during power outages until power returns. Such a simple instruction that I'd almost dismissed as paranoia. I added my own note beneath it. Power outage during thunderstorm, 3:33 a.m. Something entered, heavy footsteps, unnatural breathing, scratching sounds, left 4 deep marks on floor, not visible on camera. That night changed everything for me. I no longer questioned any of Keith's rules, no matter how strange they seemed. These weren't the confused ramblings of an isolated old man losing touch with reality. This notebook was a survival guide, carefully documented through years of encounters with things that shouldn't exist. I traced my fingers over the scratches one more time before getting the mop bucket to clean the floor. As I worked, I made a silent promise to Keith that I would follow every rule to the letter from now on. My life depended on it. I embraced my role as guardian of the Desert Moon Motel, following Keith's rules with unwavering dedication. What had once seemed like the paranoid scribbles of an isolated old man now formed the backbone of my nightly routine. The leather notebook stayed within arm's reach at all times, its worn edges and coffee-stained pages a constant reminder that I wasn't just a night manager, I was a gatekeeper. The supernatural encounters continued like clockwork. Each night at exactly 4:04 in the morning, the man in the white suit materialized inside the lobby without triggering the door chime. He stood perfectly still, his pale skin almost translucent under the fluorescent lights, dark eyes fixed on me with unnerving intensity. I kept my eyes on whatever book or magazine lay open on the desk, never making eye contact, never acknowledging his presence. For 7 minutes, I felt his gaze boring into me, the air around us growing thick and cold. Then, like clockwork, he would tilt his head at an unnatural angle, flash those perfect white teeth in what approximated a smile but wasn't quite right, and vanish without opening the door. After each visit, I checked the security footage. Just as before, the cameras captured only me, sitting rigid at the desk, eyes fixed downward, tension visible in my shoulders, reacting to something the technology couldn't see. The phone calls from room 24 persisted with the same eerie regularity. They always came in the dead hours between 2 and 3 in the morning, that soft, echoing voice requesting fresh towels or extra pillows or asking about checkout times. "Front desk," I answered one night, already knowing who would be on the line. "Could I have some extra soap?" The voice sounded like it came from underwater, with a hollow echo that made the hairs on my neck stand up. "For room 24. "I'll log your request," I replied, keeping my voice steady as I wrote in the logbook. 2:22 a.m., call from room 24 requesting soap. Room vacant. I no longer walked down the darkened walkway to investigate. I'd learned my lesson. The room would always be empty, pristine, untouched. Yet the calls kept coming from a phone that shouldn't work in an unoccupied room. Following Keith's instructions, I documented each call but never brought the requested items. Whatever resided in room 24, or used it as a doorway, wasn't getting what it wanted from me. The pale boy with his outdated clothes and too perfect posture continued his nightly visits at 1:30 on the dot, always asking the same question with practiced politeness. "May I please use the swimming pool?" he asked, standing just inside the lobby door, hands clasped in front of him. "I'm sorry, but the pool closes at 10 p.m., I replied, the words now automatic. His face would darken, eyes sinking deeper into their sockets, skin taking on that grayish tint. "The water looks so inviting," he would say, voice dropping to something that seemed to vibrate through the floor rather than travel through the air. "I can hear it calling." "Those are the rules," I told him firmly, never wavering, never showing fear despite the chill that spread through the room when his face changed. "The pool is closed at night." After each refusal, he would straighten, his face snapping back to that too wide smile, and leave without further argument. I'd watch through the windows as he walked across the parking lot and disappeared at the edge of the property, fading into darkness rather than continuing down the road. The security cameras never showed him either, just me, talking to empty air, reacting to something that left no digital footprint. Strange guests continued to appear, attempting to check in during my shift. I became adept at spotting them before they even reached the counter. Something about their movements was too precise or too jerky, their clothes either decades out of style or impossibly pristine, their eyes never quite right when they caught the light. A middle-aged man in a business suit approached the desk one night, placing a credit card on the counter. "I need a room," he said, voice flat and emotionless. "Certainly," I replied. "Can I get your name for the registration?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. "Your name, sir?" I repeated. He shifted uncomfortably, fingers tapping on his briefcase. It's... He trailed off, looking increasingly agitated. "I'm sorry, but I need your name to check you in," I said for the third time, already knowing what would happen. His eyes darkened completely, becoming bottomless pits in his face. "Give me a room," he demanded, voice suddenly layered with multiple tones speaking in unison. "I can't check you in without a name," I said calmly. "That's our policy." His face contorted with rage, teeth suddenly too numerous and sharp in his mouth. He slammed his hand on the counter with enough force to make the computer monitor jump, then snatched his credit card and stormed out, footsteps impossibly heavy on the linoleum floor. I added the encounter to Keith's notebook, documenting the time, date, and details of the interaction. The pages were filling up with my handwriting now, continuing the record my grandfather had maintained for decades. During quiet moments, I read through Keith's earlier entries, piecing together the history of what he'd experienced. The entities had been appearing since the motel opened, following patterns that rarely changed. Keith had learned the rules through trial and error, sometimes with consequences that made my skin crawl to read about. One night, I found an entry from 1986 where Keith described breaking rule number 2 by investigating room 24 after multiple calls. He'd found a woman sitting on the bed, facing away from him. When she turned, he wrote, her face had been wrong in ways I cannot describe, and he'd barely made it back to the office before collapsing. He'd been sick for 3 days afterward. Another entry from 1992 detailed what happened when he acknowledged the man in the white suit. The man had approached the desk, leaned over it with joints bending at impossible angles, and whispered something in Keith's ear. The next 2 pages were filled with frantic scribbles that made no sense, words in languages I didn't recognize, symbols that hurt my eyes to look at directly. As I read through these accounts, I realized the full weight of what Keith had done. For 37 years, he had stood guard at this desk, following these rules not just to protect himself, but to shield unsuspecting travelers from whatever lurked beyond the thin veil that separated our world from something else. The Desert Moon Motel existed at a crossroads of sorts, not just between highways in the Nevada desert, but between realities. The rules Keith had established represented a delicate balance, a way to coexist with entities that pressed against that boundary, testing it, looking for weaknesses. I thought about the travelers who passed through, tired families on road trips, truck drivers looking for a few hours of sleep, couples on desert adventures. None of them knew what might have happened without Keith's vigilance, without his meticulous adherence to rules that kept the darkness at bay. Now that responsibility had passed to me. I checked the notebook hourly, reviewed the security footage daily, and maintained the log of every supernatural encounter with religious dedication. My survival hinged on strict adherence to Keith's guidelines, but so did the safety of everyone who stopped at the Desert Moon. What had once seemed like a simple night manager job had revealed itself as something far more significant. The peculiar responsibilities I'd inherited weren't just eccentricities. They were a sacred trust, passed down from my grandfather, who had spent nearly 4 decades protecting this small corner of the world from forces beyond understanding. I looked up at the clock, 3:59 a.m. In 5 minutes, the man in the white suit would appear. I opened my book, positioned myself exactly as Keith had instructed, and prepared to ignore whatever stepped through that doorway. The rules would keep me safe. The rules would keep everyone safe. That was my job now, and I accepted it completely. I sat at the front desk, my eyes fixed on the weather radar app on my phone as red and orange warning indicators swept across the screen. The wind had picked up over the last hour, howling against the windows with increasing fury as sand began to pelt the glass like tiny bullets. "Great," I muttered, watching as the power flickered, the overhead fluorescents buzzing and dimming before stabilizing again. The Desert Moon Motel had weathered plenty of desert storms during its existence, but this sandstorm was different. The meteorologist on the local news station had called it a once-in-a-decade event before our satellite signal cut out completely. Now the motel stood completely isolated, the highway patrol having closed down the nearby roads hours ago. I checked the logbook. We had only 2 guests, both truckers who'd decided to wait out the storm rather than push on through the dangerous conditions. They were holed up in rooms 7 and 8, likely sleeping through the worst of it. The lights flickered again, and I reached for Keith's leather notebook, now as familiar in my hands as my own cell phone. Over the months I'd been here, I'd come to rely on it as my lifeline, my instruction manual for surviving the supernatural elements that called this place home. A sharp rap against the window made me jump. I turned toward the sound, and my blood ran cold. The pale boy stood outside, his face pressed against the glass, those 2 large eyes staring directly at me. But it wasn't 1:30 a.m. His usual time was hours away. Something was wrong. The door chime sounded, causing me to whip my head toward the entrance. The man in the white suit stood just inside the doorway, his translucent skin almost glowing in the dim lobby light. He wasn't moving or speaking, just standing there, staring. But it wasn't 4:04 a.m. He shouldn't be here now. The phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the howling wind. I didn't need to check the caller ID to know it was coming from room 24. All 3 at once. This had never happened before. I flipped frantically through Keith's notebook, searching for any mention of multiple entities appearing simultaneously, but before I could find anything, the lights went out completely. The darkness was absolute. No emergency lights, no exit signs, nothing but the faint glow of my phone screen on the desk. The wind screamed against the building, sand blasting the windows with such force I feared they might shatter. Following rule number 4, I immediately dropped behind the front desk, pressing my back against the wall and drawing my knees to my chest. But unlike previous power outages, this time I heard not one set of footsteps, but multiple sets, approaching from different directions. The wet, bubbling breathing of the entity from the previous power outage came from my right. From the left, I heard the light, measured steps of the boy, his shoes making a tap, tap, tap on the linoleum. And from directly in front of the desk came the perfect rhythmic footfalls of the man in the white suit. They were converging on my position. My heart hammered against my ribs as I tried to remember anything from Keith's notebook that might help. There had to be something, some protocol for when multiple entities appeared at once. Then I remembered. On the very last page of the notebook, Keith had written something I hadn't fully understood. When they all come at once, read the motel's founding date aloud. I'd dismissed it as cryptic nonsense, maybe the ramblings of an old man. But now, the footsteps were getting closer. I could feel the presence of the entities just on the other side of the desk. Something scratched against the wood, slowly, deliberately. The founding date. It was on the brass plaque in the lobby, the one mounted near the entrance that I'd dusted 100 times during my shifts. What was it? My mind raced as I tried to visualize the plaque. Established, I whispered to myself, straining to remember. Established. The scratching grew more intense. Something cold brushed against my ankle. Established 1953, I shouted into the darkness. Desert Moon Motel, established June 12th, 1953. The footsteps stopped instantly. The scratching ceased. The cold touch withdrew. For several long seconds, there was nothing but the sound of the wind and sand battering the building. Then, gradually, the emergency generator kicked in, and dim red lighting filled the lobby. I counted to 100, just as I'd learned to do during previous encounters, before slowly rising from behind the desk. The lobby was empty. No pale boy, no man in white suit, no hunched shadow with wrong-bending limbs. I was alone again. My legs trembled as I made my way back to the chair. I picked up Keith's notebook, which had fallen to the floor during my rush to hide, and opened it to where I'd left off. To my shock, there was a new page that hadn't been there before. The handwriting was Keith's, but the ink looked fresh, not aged like his other entries. The Decennial Test, the heading read. Every 10 years, on the anniversary of the motel's founding, the barriers between worlds thin. All entities will appear simultaneously to test the Guardian's commitment to the rules. Speaking the founding date aloud reestablishes the boundary and renews the covenant that allows both worlds to coexist without fully merging. The Guardian who remembers the protocols maintains the balance. The Guardian who forgets allows the worlds to bleed together. I sat back in the chair, the notebook open in my lap, as the implications washed over me. This wasn't just a job. This wasn't just a collection of superstitions or strange occurrences. I was maintaining a boundary between worlds. Each rule, each protocol that Keith had documented over his 37 years of service wasn't just about personal survival. It was about maintaining a delicate balance that kept both worlds separate but coexisting. The man in the white suit, the pale boy, the calls from room 24, they weren't random hauntings or isolated incidents. They were tests, checks, and balances, ensuring that someone remained vigilant at this crossing point between realities. I ran my fingers over Keith's handwriting, understanding now why he had been so meticulous, why he had documented everything so carefully. He wasn't just passing down advice, he was passing down a sacred trust. The emergency lights cast a red glow across the lobby as the storm continued to rage outside. But inside, a strange calm had settled over me. I knew now what I was doing here, why Keith had been so insistent that I take this job when he could no longer perform it. I was the guardian of the Desert Moon Motel, keeper of the boundary, and tonight I had passed the test. I settled into my permanent role at the Desert Moon Motel as months passed. What had once seemed bizarre and terrifying, the man in the white suit appearing at 4:04 a.m., the calls from empty room 24, the pale boy asking to swim after midnight, had become as routine as checking in truckers or restocking coffee packets. The supernatural had become natural, woven into the fabric of my nightly shifts just as seamlessly as the mundane tasks of running the front desk. Every morning before autumn arrived to take over, I'd add my observations to Keith's journal. My handwriting now filled several pages, continuing the legacy my grandfather had maintained for decades. I documented each encounter with meticulous detail, the exact time the pale boy appeared, any variations in the white suit man's behavior, the specific requests from room 24. Sometimes I'd flip back through Keith's older entries, noting patterns that stretched across years or decades, connecting my experiences to his. October 17th, 3:42 a.m., room 24 called requesting an extra blanket. Voice had more echo than usual. Room remains vacant. I wrote one night, my pen making the same scratching sound against paper that Keith's must have made thousands of times before. The leather notebook had become an extension of myself. I kept it within arm's reach at all times, often touching its worn cover for reassurance when the motel felt particularly active. The rules weren't just instructions anymore. They were a lifeline, a connection to Keith and the accumulated wisdom of someone who'd stood guard at this strange crossroads for nearly 4 decades. Today marked 6 months since I'd taken over the night shift, but more importantly, it was the anniversary of Keith's death. I'd brought a small framed photo of him to place on the desk, a reminder of why I was here and whose footsteps I followed. As I cleared space behind the computer monitor, I noticed something wedged between the desk and the wall. I reached down and pulled out what appeared to be an old photograph, its edges yellowed and curling. I turned it over in my hands, carefully brushing away a thin layer of dust. The image showed a much younger Keith, maybe in his 20s, standing proudly in front of the Desert Moon Motel. The building looked fresh, its paint bright, the neon sign gleaming in daylight, but what caught my attention was the older man standing beside Keith, one hand on his shoulder. They had the same eyes, the same set of their jaw. The older man wore a night manager's uniform identical to the one Keith had worn, identical to the one I now wore. I flipped the photo over, written in faded ink, "First day at Desert Moon with Grandpa Joe, June 1953. My breath caught as understanding dawned. Keith hadn't been the first guardian. He'd inherited the position from his own grandfather, just as I had inherited it from Keith. The Desert Moon hadn't just been Keith's responsibility, it had been our family's responsibility for generations. I placed the photo carefully on the desk beside the one I'd brought. 3 generations of Espinosa men, all night managers at the Desert Moon Motel, all guardians of whatever strange boundary existed here. The rest of my shift passed quietly. I checked in a couple driving through to California, restocked the vending machine, and performed my regular patrol of the property. At 2:17 a.m., room 24 called requesting more towels. I logged it as always, but didn't investigate. At 4:04 a.m., the man in the white suit appeared, stood motionless for 7 minutes, then vanished. I ignored him completely, eyes fixed on my book. Around 5:30 a.m., I was filing some paperwork when something in my peripheral vision caught my attention. I looked up at the large mirror hanging behind the front desk, a decorative piece that had been there since before Keith's time. Keith stood there, reflected in the glass. Not Keith as I'd known him in his final years, frail and stooped, but Keith as he appeared in the old photograph, young and straight-backed in his night manager's uniform. He wasn't transparent or ghostly. He simply stood there in the mirror while the actual space behind me remained empty. I didn't feel afraid. This wasn't like the entities that visited the motel. This was Keith, family. He looked at me with clear eyes, a slight smile on his face, and nodded once, slowly, deliberately, before his image began to fade from the edges inward until the mirror showed only the empty lobby behind me. I sat motionless for several minutes, processing what I'd seen. It hadn't been a ghost or an apparition in the traditional sense. It felt more like acknowledgement, recognition, approval. I understood now that I was part of something ancient and important. The Desert Moon Motel wasn't just a roadside stop for weary travelers. It existed as a boundary between worlds, a thin place where realities brushed against each other. And my family, the Espinosas, had always been its keepers. I picked up Keith's notebook, our notebook now, and opened to a fresh page. I wrote the date and time, then carefully documented what I'd seen in the mirror. Below that, I added, "Discovered photo of Keith and his grandfather Joe from 1953. 3 generations of guardians at the Desert Moon. The responsibility passes down through our family." I closed the notebook and placed my hand flat on its worn cover. I accepted this inheritance fully. The strange rules, the midnight visitors, the calls from empty rooms. They were my legacy now, my birthright, my responsibility. The rules would keep both me and the outside world safe from forces beyond understanding, just as they had for Keith and for his grandfather before him. The desk clock read 6:58 a.m. Autumn would arrive soon to take over the day shift. Outside, the sky was lightening to a pale blue, the stars fading as the desert prepared for another scorching day. I gathered my things, tucked the notebook under my arm, and picked up both photographs, the one I'd brought and the one I'd found. 3 generations of guardians, 3 men who had stood watch at this strange crossroads between worlds. I was the newest in that line, but I wouldn't be the last. Somehow I knew that when my time came, another Espinosa would take my place, learn the rules, and continue our family's sacred trust. The door chimes sounded as Autumn walked in, coffee in hand. "Morning, Travis. Quiet night?" I nodded, looking one last time at the mirror that now showed only ordinary reflections. Just another night at the Desert Moon.